Let me read this section quickly, but reverently, so that we could begin to look at these different things. This is Mark. Mark's version is a little bit different than Matthew. Mark says this in 45 to 56. Immediately, Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the crowd away. And bidding them farewell, he left for the mountain to pray. When it was evening, the boat was in the middle of the sea, and he was alone on the land. Seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, at about the fourth watch in the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and he intended to pass by them. But when they saw he was walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost, and they cried out. For they all saw him and were terrified. But immediately he spoke to them and said to them, "Take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid." Then he got into the boat with them, and the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished. For they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their heart was hardened. When they crossed over and came to the land of Gennesaret and moored to the shore. When they got out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him. They ran about the whole country and began to carry here and there on their pallets those who were sick, to the place they heard he was. Whenever he entered villages or cities or countryside, they were laying the sick in marketplaces, imploring him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. And as many as touched him were cured. Father, thank you so much for all of your word, and especially this section this morning. It is a very unique and special section. I pray the Spirit of God gives all of us wisdom as we look at this passage, that we might be able to better understand our Messiah. Help us to know him intimately through these few minutes. We ask this in his name, through the Spirit of God. Amen. Question that I had after I read all of this for all of us is it possible to be very close to Jesus and still not understand him? Can we, in the current vernacular, be on our spiritual journey with a companion who's really unknown to us? And I think not only is it possible, but it may be more common than we might imagine. Some people are walking along claiming to be followers of Jesus and never realize who he is. And there's a clear example of that in our text this morning. I want to break it up into a few sections. I want to look at the first verse 45. It says, immediately, Mark's famous word, immediately Jesus made his disciples get into the boat and go ahead of him to the other side of Bethsaida, while he himself was sending the crowds away. We need to put this incident in context so that we can understand exactly what happened, and this follows on the heel of the feeding of the 5,000. And the feeding of the 5,000, I don't know, Mickey, I couldn't be here, but the feeding of the 5,000 is actually a misnomer. It was way more than 5,000 people. The text literally says that it was 5,000 men. So we know there was women in the crowd. There most likely was children. I would say, without overestimating it, you could easily be talking about 15,000 people that were in that crowd. Easily. That's a pretty big crowd. 15,000 people. So here we are after the feeding of the 15,000, and it says that Jesus made his disciples get into the boat. Why would he do that? Why did he make them get into the boat? Well, let's look at the situation. The crowd is thinking about a Messiah. The crowd is thinking about a Redeemer who's going to come and throw the yoke of Rome off the neck of the people of Israel. There was this expectation. And how can we know this? How do we know this is really what was happening? Well, I don't and haven't been using other Gospels to kind of, sometimes when people teach you the Gospels, they say, Mark says this, and Matthew says this, and Luke says this, and I have nothing against that, but I made a decision at the beginning that I was going to use the text from Mark to get Mark's perspective on something. But there's only one reason that rules are made, and I know that better than anybody else, and that is to break them. So that's what I want to do this morning, because there's something that's unusual in here. Now, Matthew, Mark, and Luke are known as the Synoptic Gospels. And synoptic means, consensus or brought together. And that's what they're often called, the synoptics. And again, the only reason I tell you that is so you can go to your friends or go to other churches and show off a little bit. Mention, we're talking about the synoptic gospels. And again, just turn around and walk away. Let them wonder what you're talking about. Because you know because you're here. But when people talk about the synoptic gospels, that's what they're talking about. Matthew, Mark, Luke, very similar stories, maybe a little bit different wording, whatever. John is a gospel that's unique among the four gospels. But here in the synoptics, there is a parallel version that's mentioned in John, which is not a synoptic gospel, but this is what John says. He's describing the same incident. Listen to what he says. Therefore, when the people, the 15,000 people, saw the sign which he had performed, feeding, they said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." So Jesus, perceiving that they were intending to come and take him by force to make him king, withdrew again to the mountain by himself alone. So you see, Mark is telling us what's happening. John's giving us a little bit of the thought process. Jesus is here on the shore with the disciples, 15,000 fed. They're all thinking about making him king. He knows what's happening. So what does Jesus do? He made the disciples get in the boat and leave. He knew what was sweeping through the crowd. He could feel it. He certainly knew, but he felt it. And I was trying to think of something. Did you ever go to a concert? That's the only thing I could think of. And kind of the same feeling flows through the entire audience. You could feel it. Everybody's thinking the same thing at the same time. It like sweeps through the crowd. Fortunately, I've never been in a riot. I've seen them on TV, but I'm certain that's the same type of thing. The feeling sweeps through the crowd. I personally felt it many times when I feel the thought sweeping through all of you that you're thinking, when is he going to finish? So I know the sweeping thought. I understand it. But you see what's happening? There's this messianic fever, a tension in the air. And Jesus knew it. And it was contagious. And it was going to affect the disciples. And he made them get in the boat because he did not want them to be a part of it. The word made in the Greek, it's a very strong verb. James Edward, in his commentary, describes it this way. He compelled them post-haste, which means nothing to me since I never paid attention in school. But I found out it means an urgent dismissal is what he was doing. He said, you guys got to get out of here. Why would he do that? Why did he want the disciples to leave? Why did he make them leave during this time? Well, I think there's two answers. One thing is, Edwards again, he says, the disciples were not immune to the messianic contagion of the crowd. They would have kind of been swept away by the crowd. Nothing against the disciples. I'll talk about this a little bit more, but emotionally at times they were a little unstable. They reacted emotionally, which is a tendency of human beings. So Jesus knew this was infectious emotion, and he didn't want the disciples to be affected by that. I think that Jesus was concerned too because the disciples responded emotionally, and he knew he didn't want them to stay. And I don't want to spend a lot of time thinking about that, but it made me think about leadership. That here Jesus knew what was best for the people he was leading, even if they weren't fully aware of what was happening. And that's one of the lonely things sometimes of being a leader, is that there's something that you know, and I would say without, oh my goodness, arrogance, self-righteousness. Sometimes as a leader, you know that there are things that God would have you have your people avoid. And I think this is one of those situations. He was the shepherd protecting his sheep. It wasn't good for them to be there, so he wanted them to leave. It was kind of for their own good that he had them leave. And the second reason is, this is by R.T. France, he articulates a different kind of idea. If the disciples remained, they might have made the situation worse by adding fuel to the fire, letting people know about the meal they just ate and other miracles performed. And that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? You have this messianic tension running through the crowd. The disciples, they get all into it, and they're all excited. Hey, man, you know where that bread came from you were eating? Should have seen when the demons were cast out. You hear about that? Have you heard his new teaching? You hear all these? They would have just incited the crowd even more. And I think that's another reason why Jesus wanted to get out of the way. The disciples were reluctant to leave because Mark says Jesus packs the disciples off, sends them away in a hurry to get away from the contagious atmosphere. Makes perfect sense to me. He's trying to keep the situation calm, keep everything on course, and protect those that he was watching over. And then they're gone. And Mark says he himself was sending the crowds away. Now, this is something that I just can't really imagine. I mean, can you imagine trying to control a crowd? You take 50 people who have their minds made up and you try to control them. I have had the displeasure, I hope I don't offend anybody, but I thought about that ex post facto, but I've had the displeasure of attending the town council meetings in Gilbert. And you talk about a crowd and trying to change a crowd's mind. I mean, it's just impossible. Jesus himself alone on the shore, 15,000 people. Can you imagine such a thing? He himself was sending them away. I mean, that's just incredible to me. I can't imagine the power of his personality. Yes, I understand he was completely human, completely divine. But still, a lone figure dismissing, pacifying, sending away 15,000 people who wanted to make him king. That's incredible to me. I can't even imagine such a thing. When they're gone, the disciples are gone, it says, bidding them farewell, he left for the mountain to pray. And that's what we see. And again, remembering Jesus is fully God, fully man. Theologians call this the hypostatic union. Only individual in that could ever be that was fully God, fully man. Hypostatic union. That's another term you could tell your friends about that they might not know. But we see the two sides of him, the human side and the divine side. For his human side, think of what a draining experience this was for Jesus. It seems, to some extent that I do not understand, that the doing miracles was tiring for Jesus, humanly speaking. And we can understand this. Do you know how tiring it is sometimes when you spend time with a friend who needs some help? Especially somebody that's upset and you spend a couple hours talking to them and you didn't really do anything, so to speak. I'm not discounting comfort, but you're tired. Imagine this. Feeding the 15,000 and then sending them away. I mean, Jesus was probably pretty tired, I think. And then he goes to pray. Alfred Edersheim, an old commentator, lived in the last century. This is what he said, what did the Savior pray? We dare not imagine this conversation. And I respect his attitude. He's always very reverent. What did he say? We don't know. We can't even begin to imagine. But the idea is that it was a very intimate conversation. I will not say you, but I will say me, that I am guilty many times of praying and not realizing the intimacy of what I'm doing. I am speaking to God. He is listening to me. We are having an intimate conversation. You think about things that happen in your house. If it's husband and wife. If you're not arguing, I'm putting that aside. But if you're having a conversation, you have an intimate conversation. It's private. It's personal. It's between the two of you. You say things you would never say to your in-laws or your cousins or the people in the block. It's a personal, private, intimate conversation. This is what Jesus was doing on the mountain. In human terms, the way we describe the triunity of God, it was the Son talking to his Father. An intimate conversation. And I don't often think about the unrecorded prayers of Jesus this way. We have a lot of his recorded prayers that he wanted, for lack of a better term, to be public. This was a private conversation between him and God. And it makes it reverent. It makes it holy. It makes it unique. And I think that certainly Jesus was feeling lonely. I think that's really true. The crowd wanted him to become king, the warrior, redeemer for them. The disciples expected other things of him. There was not one person on the face of the earth who understood him. No one. No one. And I know that I'm a very good person and I'm often misunderstood. I cannot imagine what life like was for him. I cannot imagine. He could not really be known by anyone except his Father. It was a lonely time. I think it was a quiet, close, intimate conversation that he has that nobody really understood. And, that's a thing, too, that brought me comfort, because there are times, when we're honest, that we really think nobody in the world understands us. I can assure most of you, knowing you, it's because a lot of you are just crazy, and the fact that nobody understands you, that's perfectly good and normal. But there are times when we really are alone, when we have no one that we could talk to, that no one really understands how we feel, but our Father in heaven knows. Just like with Jesus. What a comfort that is. It doesn't matter. When you're in a situation, nobody understands, everybody misunderstands you, everybody thinks your motives are wrong and bad, and you just can't even explain yourself. There is someone who knows. That's what Jesus did. He went to his Father because he would know. And it was a real comfort to him. It's a comfort to me. It should be a comfort to all of us. And Jesus went to the Father because he wanted his ministry to be God-directed, not man-directed. Man-directed ministry meant he took advantage of his popularity, and he would have gone that way. What a temptation that is. What a temptation to be lifted up and praised. 15,000 people. It affects you. I don't care who you are. That's why it's good to go to God. I spoke at a church, 10 years ago in Texas. A big church. They put me up in this 5-star hotel. It was like a 9-star hotel. When you walked in the lobby, I was there 5 minutes. Mr. Styler, what can we do for you? Mr. Styler, what do you need? Pick up Mr. Styler. The second day I was there and I walked through the lobby, somebody didn't say Mr. Styler, and I was personally offended. I am Mr. Styler 1505. We get swept away by this. Jesus, 15,000 people. And he wasn't carried away. He was concerned about God's view of what he was doing, not the people. That's incredible to me. He's there, he's praying, and while he's praying, it says, while it was evening, this is late in the night, technically the second evening, the boat was in the middle of the sea that he made the disciples get in. He was alone on the land, alone talking to his Father. Seeing them straining at the oars, for the wind was against them, about the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea, and intended to pass by them. It's late at night, he's by himself. Mark says he sees them. Several opinions about how he saw them. One is, he was alone on the mountain, it says. Someone, I don't know, I can't even imagine such a thing, went back through the calendars, blah, 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 to this year, but said that night there was a full moon. He could see out into the lake, and I don't know. Maybe he did see them that way. Maybe he saw them in his mind's eye. Maybe he saw them in a unique way, the way that God showed Moses the entire land of Israel. I don't know. The most important thing to me is that he sees them. Okay, so we could have all the other theories, interesting, nice. In the end, he saw them, and it says he sees them straining at the oars. And this is an interesting word too, the word straining. It means torment or torture. It's most often used about people who are in torment of demons, tortured by demons, that struggle against the spiritual world. That's the idea here. It's used, another thing about difficult times or dire straits. Not the band or Mark Knopfler in particular, but a difficult situation. It's also used, this will really bring it home, I think, of contractions in childbirth. That's quite an effort. You ever witnessed that or experienced that or been the person having that experience? That's an effort. That's the kind of effort these guys were putting into rowing. They're not just rowing real hard. I mean, this is like a contraction in childbirth. That's a super effort. Took all their strength. They weren't making any headway with it. So here they are out there trying to go against this wind that rises up on the Sea of Galilee. They're straining against there, and R.T. France points out something to me which I hadn't thought of, but he says this. There's a recurring element in Mark. Whenever the master is absent from his disciples, they find themselves in distress. That hit me like a hammer. And I say that not having the experience of getting hit by a hammer, but it was kind of like that. Like, yeah, that's so obvious, isn't it? When they were not with him, they were in distress. That's a pretty obvious truth. I mean, who hasn't had that kind of experience? It's a simple truth that's so true. We are not with him, we're in distress. That's naturally what would happen. France goes on to say this, each time the disciples experience anguish too, it's because of their lack of faith. And that was so convicting to me too. Their anguish was from a lack of faith in God. That's really what happens every time we're in anguish. We forget who we are, where we are, who's watching us, and we lose our faith, and the result is anguish. And it's just, to me, I found out, if I could use this word, the secret is to remove anguish and distress is to keep Jesus close in your life and live by faith in him. I mean, isn't that so obvious? I mean, we've heard it a million times in a million different ways, but that's what it is. Secret to stay out of distress and anguish is to live close to Jesus and have faith in him, and all kinds of situations can be handled through that. So here we are, disciples out in the middle. They're having these childbirth contractions as they row. The wind's against them. They're alone. It's the 3 to 6 o'clock in the morning, and Jesus appears walking on the water. It's a straightforward meaning. There's no other way to understand it. There's many rationalists and people deny the ability of Jesus to walk on water, but it's just silliness. That's what the text says. That's what he did. There's many explanations. There's two real popular ones. One is that he was really walking along the shore, but from the disciples' angle, they had the optical illusion that he was walking on the water. That's one. The second one is my favorite. I've heard it many times, especially in Israel, some of the guides, the sandbar idea. That Jesus was able to find the sandbar and walk on it, and it appeared as though he's walking on water. And the old joke is that if you could find a sandbar in the middle of the Sea of Galilee during a windy storm, that's a bigger miracle. So either way, but there's no natural explanation. The fact is that Jesus came out walking on the water because he saw them, and then Mark tells us that he intended to pass them by. Now that statement is a little hard to reconcile with the idea of Jesus seeing them and coming out. He saw them and he intended to pass them by. One idea is that this statement represents the disciples' point of view, that it may have looked like to them that he intended to pass them by. That's one explanation. Edwards, in his commentary, has a very different explanation. I don't know if I agree with it or not. To be totally honest with you, sometimes 7 days to prepare a sermon is not enough. You can't really think things through. The other thing is, too, that I think there's some things, maybe it's just me, I could spend the rest of my life thinking about and I can't figure out. So I'm going to tell you what he thinks because I think it's possible and does have a connection. But Edwards says this nondescript phrase about passing them by is charged with special force, signaling a rare self-revelation of God. Okay, so he says the phrase passing by, is a rare phrase that's charged with a special idea of revealing God. And he gives many examples. I'll give you two. Exodus 33:19. Remember Moses asked to see God's glory? And God put him in a cave and he said, I myself will make all my goodness pass before you and proclaim the name of the Lord before you, be gracious to you. So what he's saying is it's the same idea. It's a revelation of God passing, letting Moses know. Also, in Kings 19, 1 Kings, when God reveals his glory to Elijah, remember? He said to Elijah, go forth, stand on the mountain before the Lord, and behold, the Lord was passing by. Edwards says this phrase is not just a simple phrase, but it refers back to God revealing himself in the Old Testament, especially here to Moses and to Elijah. And he says now that Mark is using the phrase in the same way, that it's Jesus as he goes by intending to reveal himself. The difference is, this time he actually does reveal himself, not as God did in the Old Testament. I don't know. It's something to think about. But it's an odd thing to me, intending to pass them by. 49, but when they saw him walking on the sea, they supposed it was a ghost and cried out. No kidding. Well, they all saw him and were terrified, but immediately he spoke with them and said to them, take courage, it is I. Do not be afraid. These guys thought they saw a ghost, and who could blame them? They didn't think they saw the ghost of Jesus. What they were thinking at first, I believe, was they were thinking that it was some kind of water spirit. During the time of Jesus, there were all different kinds of spirits. One of them mentioned specifically in the Talmud was about a water spirit who would drive up the waves and make the sea go kind of crazy. I think the disciples may have thought that. They had no idea what was happening. They just knew it was a ghost. And you go back for a minute to this idea of intending to pass them by. If we just read the simple text, that Jesus saw them, he saw them, he came out, and he was intending to pass them by, suppose that's just the simple meaning. Maybe that was his original intention, that he was praying for them and he figured they'll make it eventually. He'd meet them on the other side. That's a possibility. But the bottom line of all of it, to me, is that they cried out and he stopped. That's the most important thing. We could look at it any number of ways, but they were in trouble, they cried out, and what did he do? He stopped to see them. And reading it as it's translated, maybe he intended to go by, but they stopped. I'm sure there was some yelling there, and probably some of the guys were screaming. I know I would have been in that situation. They needed his help, and he gave it. And I was thinking about that, and I believe the opposite is true too. In general, think about this. In general, I'm saying that many times people will say that they don't need God or don't want God in a situation or in this life, and God leaves them alone. And I mean that in the sense of he doesn't force himself into someone's life. Yes, God is sovereign, can override anything, anybody's will, absolutely. But I think also there's some way that God respects the freedom of will that he gives us. If we cry out and ask him to come and help us, I believe that he does. On the other hand, I believe that if people tell him, we don't want you involved in this, that he will allow that to happen as well. I think if the disciples didn't cry out and look for him, he might not have stopped. And to me, that's a very frightening thing, because you hear people say that all the time. And the saying that people have now, keep God out of this, keep God out of the schools. I think God respects that and stays out. I know it's not 100% true in a divine manner, but I think that God does respect people and leaves them alone if they choose, which to me is kind of frightening. But he'd cry out, he assures him, take courage, it is me, do not be afraid. The literal translation of it is me is I am. That's the literal translation. I am. Does that sound familiar to you, that phrase? It's a phrase that God used to tell Moses his name. God said to Moses, I am who I am. And he said, thus you shall say to the sons of Israel, I am has sent me to you. It's God's own name. In John 8:58, remember they're going through the whole thing and they're going to stone Jesus. And at the end, Jesus says, truly, truly, I say to you, before Abraham was, I am. And it says they picked up stones to stone him. Why? Because he was making a claim to divinity. I am is the name of God. This is the exact same phrasing that's used here. Ergo ami, I am. And I think that this is Jesus taking the name of God. There's many people that say it is I, but in the context, I think reading it, take courage, I am, do not be afraid, makes much more sense. Because he's making a claim to divinity, and that divine claim gives power to the statement. I know I mentioned this about a month or two before, but there's a lot of people now who use the phrase, I'm going to hold you up in the light. No criticism meant of that in any way. I understand people have a good intention when they say that. And I would much rather have people have good intention in helping something than not. But the truth is, holding someone in the light is a good intention, but they don't have the ability to change the situation. When you hold somebody up in the light, you can't fix their problem. You can't. You could have a good intention, but a good intention without the ability to do it is kind of meaningless. Here, Jesus said, take courage, I am. Take courage, I'm God. Don't be afraid. He not only has the good intention, he has the ability to back it up. Take courage, I'm God, you're in my hands. That's what he's really saying to them, which I find is pretty comforting. And I think, too, that that's a good thing for us when we are in distress or upset about something, to remember, take courage, I am. Don't be afraid. That's his advice to the disciples, his advice to us. Then he got in the boat with them, the wind stopped, and they were utterly astonished. And here, listen to this. This is a hard phrase. For they had not gained any insight from the incident of the loaves, but their hearts were hardened. After all this, the disciples were spent emotionally, physically. They still didn't get it. The truth didn't make their way into their hearts. They had seen the miracle of the feeding of the 5,000. They had just been rescued. They had seen him walking on the water. It only left them astonished, not with understanding. This is the same phrase we read earlier. We read it in Mark 3:5. Remember Jesus was in the synagogue at Capernaum, and the man had the withered hand, and it was the Sabbath. And Jesus said to the people there, tell me, is it good to do good on the Sabbath or not? And the people didn't answer him. And it says, this is what it says in Mark. He said to the man, after looking at them with anger, grieved at the hardness of heart, he said to the man, stretch out your hand, and he stretched it out, was restored. The hardness of heart of the disciples in this situation was the same thing as the hardness of heart of those in the synagogue. That's kind of hard to put a handle on. They're right there. And they've seen, and they have this hardness of heart. It seems impossible that they don't get it, but yet, I turn the question back to myself. How many times have I seen the work of God in my life? I've seen God work many times, in many ways, not just in my life, in other people's lives. I've seen him do things personally for me, where I really called out to him and needed him, and he responded in a way that I knew it was him. I know you have too. And we know of the testimony of other people who tell us, I cried out to God, he did it. These guys were there. We have seen so much more than they have. And not just that. We know that Jesus himself has come back from the dead even. And still we struggle with these things sometimes. This really shouldn't be. And Mark ends with this section. When they had crossed over the land at Gennesaret and moored to the shore, when they got out of the boat, immediately the people recognized him, ran about the whole community, began to carry people here and there on their pallets, those who were sick to the place they heard he was. And whenever he entered the villages or cities or countryside, they were laying the sick in the marketplaces, imploring him that they might just touch the fringe of his cloak. And as many as it touched him were being cured. After this whole section, they land at Gennesaret. The people recognize him. There's a frenzy. People everywhere he goes, there's a frenzy of people engulfing him, bringing people to be healed. And it says that those people were healed. And I would have done the same. You know you would have too. If there was somebody in your family that was sick and Jesus was going to be in downtown Mesa, you'd go there. I guarantee you. You'd go there. If we found out he was going to be in Flagstaff or in Los Angeles, we'd go. We would go. And that's what this frenzy was gripping all these people. It says those that even touched the fringe, the tzitzits of his garment, they were healed. Everyone was healed. William Lane says this vignette is reminiscent of other crowds which had clamored to touch Jesus in a feverish mood of excitement bordering on hysteria, and recalls an earlier situation when Jesus found it necessary to avoid towns and cities altogether. It was a hysteria when he came into the area. I was trying to think of what it was like. What is in our time could we possibly compare this to? Last week or the week before, I was listening to NPR. They were doing a report on the refugees in Greece. There are thousands and thousands of people who are stuck in Greece. And the reason they're stuck there is because they can't get the paperwork to get out of Greece in order to move on to some other place to live. And they live in these horrid camps. And they can't get the paperwork. What the embassy has done is they set up certain hours on every day where people answer the phones in different languages so that they can speak to somebody in their own language. The problem is they're limited to several hours a week. And there's 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people trying to get through at the same time. And they're interviewing these people, and the guy's showing his cell phone, 700 calls, never answered. People trying to fight to get into the embassy because there's a rumor, possibly true, nobody really knows, there's some computers in the embassy. If you try to make an online appointment, obviously you need to have a computer. The computers within the embassy are rumored to be more efficient at possibly getting through. People line up for days in advance to get in the line so they could use a computer inside the embassy. And I don't know about you, I am not in any way comparing, but you ever been in an airport when something happened? You hear more lies and nonsense than you have no idea what's going on. None. I was at Newark Airport 3-4 years ago when that guy jumped over the TSA barrier and they just caught him on camera. TSA didn't catch him, the airline caught him. And they shut the airport down. I was supposed to go to Israel. I was there for 30 hours. We're all waiting, the whole airport. There was thousands of people jammed up everywhere. And every 5 minutes you hear somebody say, hey, they're doing this, they're doing that. They're all untrue. But whatever it was, people responded to it and reacted. I found out later that guy snuck over the border because he wanted to kiss his girlfriend, and I totally forgave him. I could understand that. Good for you, buddy. But I understand what it's like to be in a crowd and not really know what's going on. I cannot imagine the hysteria here, trying to get your family out every day, calling that from 12 to 2. You start calling 11:59, bang, 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 1,000 times. Who knows? You just do it. You do because you want to get your family out. That's the kind of hysteria that happened during this with Jesus. People knew he could heal. People knew he had this gift. They wanted to get there, and they would do anything to get there. It was so much so that it overwhelmed him. And Mark, that's why he stayed outside in the cities and towns. It was just overwhelming. He couldn't finish the ministry he had. So I understand. And Mark finishes up with this. And Mark also tells us there was no teaching that he did then. You see, that's a sad thing and a good thing, that they really weren't ready to hear anything. The Son of God was there. All those people didn't understand him either. They wanted to get healed. And Jesus knew they really didn't want to know, really didn't want to hear. But again, in the character of God, he healed them anyway. He just kept healing them. He knew that they wouldn't listen, but he did. Okay. For me, the frightening truth of this section is that we could be close to Jesus and still really not know him. I'm not talking about whether you're born again or not, though I think there are many people who believe they have a relationship with God that really don't. But what about us who do? Will we be close to him and not really understand him? I think that we can. I used to be amazed when the What Would Jesus Do movement was going on. I thought it was a great thing. I really did. But it just always surprised me that a lot of the people that said, what would Jesus do, didn't know what Jesus would really do. I mean, that's really the truth, because they really didn't know him. Jesus was not some simplistic, do-good person, but he was the almighty Son of God. He came with a clear purpose and a clear ministry and a clear method of doing that ministry. So I think that we need to be careful that being close to Jesus is one thing. Understanding him is another. I want to be careful that we're not like the disciples who, even though they were with him, they didn't know him. Let's not be witnesses of his miracles and still not see who he is and what he can do. Let's be careful not to make our goals become his goals. To use a phrase that he used, let's take the narrow road, the road less traveled, the road that leads to knowledge and understanding of the Messiah, the road where we travel closely with him in faith. And I pray for all of us that the Spirit of God would open our eyes so that we would know him and not just be near him.